my working life is to curate a series of monthly public events which run during teaching weeks. And this is actually our 7th series of events, which is quite extraordinary when I come to think about it. And I have really, really wanted to get tonight's speaker along for quite a long time, so I'm absolutely thrilled that she is joining us this evening. Polly and I actually go back a very, very long way. It's one of those kind of scary memories when you realise how old you are. But although Polly was just a young slip of a thing.
Oh, yes.
But yeah,
6 or 7.
6 or 7 when you cover both of my maternities.
Yes.
But it's really, really a delight to have her here today. So Polly is a poet and non-fiction writer whose work focuses on nature, place and disability. And I know that many of you in the room, certainly our MA students, know quite a lot about her work already. Her non-fiction includes the wonderful Recovering Dorothy, The Hidden Life of Dorothy Wordsworth, Some of Us Just Fall, On Nature and Not Getting Better, and most recently, The Company of Owls. And as you can see, we're going to be hearing about some of these threads woven together this evening. She works as a freelance writer from her home in the English Lake District, just down the road in fact, and she co-owns the very wonderful Grasmere Bookshop, Sam Reed Bookseller, which again I know many of us in this room frequent. So the title of Polly's talk this evening is Companions of Nature, from Sickbed Consolations to Mimic Hooting. I cannot wait. Thank you very much, Polly. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Penny, for inviting me to give this talk, and to everybody for coming. We're trying to record it in a very lo-fi way, in the most technically specific way possible, with a phone balanced on a stapler. So hopefully that will all work. And I'm keeping time on my partner's phone, which also I'm sure will work fine. It's all very organised. It's especially lovely to be able to mark the paperback publication of The Company of Owls in this way. So I know many people here have a great interest in Dorothy Wordsworth, in romantic legacies in the Lake District and in Lake District literature more widely. So I'm going to try and blend a few different things together for you this evening to draw on some of my thinking from Recovering Dorothy, together with The Company of Owls, and show how one led directly to the other. I'm going to speak, I hope, for about 40 minutes and leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. That's if I don't deviate too much. So we're going to start with the idea of sickbed consolations. And just before we go into that, Penny did tell me I have a dobber here, so I can point out, in case you're a bit worried and you're not sure, this is Dorothy Wordsworth, and this is a tawny owl. Just to be clear. So Dorothy Wordsworth, tawny owlet, not to be confused with each other. And this also is not a tawny owlet, just in case you're confused. Okay. So, sickbed consolations. Dorothy has a series of acute episodes of illness between 1829 and 1835. The last one, in 1835, leaves her with a cognitive impairment, and we don't quite know how that happened. She lived another 20 years after this, dying on January the 25th, 1855, a month after her 84th birthday, outliving her brother by 5 years. Back in 1832, when she was in the midst of the sickness, she begins to make a collection of poems within her commonplace book, her daily notebook, which she calls Sickbed Consolations. And this is like a little kind of title slip in that commonplace book. Sickbed Consolations, composed during the spring of the year 1832. These sickbed consolations were begun at a time when Dorothy had been ill on and off for over 2 years, but did not imagine that she would be ill for the rest of her life. She saw her life in the sick room as a temporary disruption, not as a permanent state. It was something she had to be patient through and learn from. The poems reflect her hopes for the future, for recovery, but more than anything, they show her attempts to work out how to live with her new reality. It's a struggle shared by anyone with an acquired disability and by many people with lifelong illnesses as their condition changes over time. The poems that she writes are a solace and a comfort in themselves, but also reach towards pleasure, joy, mitigation of grief and pain. There's 3 main things that bring Dorothy consolation in her illness: nature, memory, and poetry. For Dorothy, the three are entirely tangled up in each other. Writing and reciting poetry become a way of both reigniting memories and bringing the natural world into her mind and her room, even when she cannot leave her bed. It's a way of shifting location without literally shifting. Her greatest consolation is to be out in the fresh air amongst other living things. When she can't be physically outside, she brings the outside, plants and creatures, into the sick room and into her mind. This happens literally in the location of the sick room, and in memory and imagination. Her poetry brings all of that together as it repeats and performs this enfolding or unfolding of location. The way Dorothy negotiates consolation, a soothing, not a healing, a coming together of distant places and times to bring enjoyment into a painful and dark time, is very instructive to me. It also echoes a lot of contemporary writing by disabled and chronically ill writers. So Dorothy's poems are meant as consolations, both in the making of them and in their message. They're poems which speak of finding solace, of light in the dark, but her drafts show her struggling with this notion of consolation and with coming to terms with her confinement. In the spring of 1832, Dorothy's niece Dora relates the difference Dorothy's found in her second winter of sickness versus her first. In the first winter, Dora explains, Dorothy had said that even during all of her suffering, her mind was active, so truly active that it was truly a mansion for all lovely forms, and her memory was a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Dorothy is quoting William's Tintern Abbey poem to explain her state of mind there. So in the prayer that William built into that poem over 30 years beforehand, he imagines Dorothy's mature after years. When thy mind shall be a mansion for all lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies. Oh then, if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations. These ideas are revised in the first of Dorothy's sickbed consolations, Thoughts on My Sickbed, which is written in May 1832. It becomes a foundational text that all of her other consolation poems sample from, expand on, and argue with, returning to questions around confinement, location, freedom, and imaginative travel. And this is the manuscript of that poem, but I'm going to read it, the whole poem to you. So you can see the manuscript there. Thoughts on My Sickbed. So this is May 1832. And has the remnant of my life been pilfered of this sunny spring, and have its own prelusive sounds touched in my heart no echoing string? Ah, say not so. The hidden life couchant within this feeble frame hath been enriched by kindred gifts that undesired, unsought for, came. With joyful heart in youthful days, when fresh each season in its round, I welcomed the earlier celandine glittering upon the mossy ground. With busy eyes I pierced the lane in quest of known and unknown things. The primrose a lamp on its fortress rock, the silent butterfly spreading its wings, the violet betrayed by its noiseless breath, the daffodil dancing in the breeze, the caroling thrush on his naked perch, towering above the budding trees. Our cottage hearth no longer our home, companions of nature were we. The stirring, the still, the loquacious, the mute, to all we gave our sympathy. Yet never in those careless days when springtime in rock, field or bower was but a fountain of earthly hope, a promise of fruits and a splendid flower. No, then I never felt a bliss that might with that compare, which piercing to my couch of rest, came on the vernal air. When loving friends an offering brought, the first flowers of the year, culled from the precincts of our home, from nooks to memory dear. With some sad thoughts the work was done, unprompted and unbidden. But joy it brought to my hidden life, to consciousness no longer hidden. I felt a power unfelt before, controlling weakness, languor, pain. It bore me to the terraced walk. I trod the hills again. No prisoner in this lonely room, I saw the green banks of the Wye, recalling thy prophetic words, bard, brother, friend from infancy. No need of motion or of strength, or even the breathing air. I thought of nature's loveliest scenes, and with memory I was there. So both poetry and place often become portals in William's work, and we can see Dorothy using poetry and nature in a similar way. The poem both records the unlocking of a route back or out into other places, and becomes, in the writing of it, a kind of key to opening that door. It's important that in Dorothy's poem, the original key is flowers brought into her room, culled from the precincts of our home, from nooks to memory dear. In a letter to Edward Quillinan in May 1832, Dora explains how Dorothy wrote Thoughts on My Sickbed after the family brought flowers into her room. In the poem, Dorothy makes it clear that they are already auratic objects, imbued with memory and emotion, not just any old flowers, but old friends to her. Bringing them into her room is what allows her to travel beyond it, in her mind at least. Writing this into a poem makes the poem a kind of secondary key. The poem perpetually reenacts the revelation of her hidden life to her consciousness, so the repeating it, reciting it, editing it, working on it, copying it out for friends repeatedly, each of these acts reopens that door or recreates the conditions of unbodily travel or travel through and out of the body. It's also revising William's youthful notions of how that relationship between nature, memory, and the self might work. In Tintern Abbey, William calls himself a worshipper of nature. A hierarchical relationship would suggest devotion and adoration on the part of the human to something powerful, other, beyond their sphere. In Thoughts on My Sickbed, Dorothy describes herself and William as companions of nature in those years, which is a fascinating and illuminating distinction. In her version, they're part of nature and its workings. They're in relationship with it as equals, fellow dwellers in a shared landscape. William's poem is a poem of an able-bodied 28-year-old. When he imagines nature helping his sister overcome solitude or fear or pain or grief in the future, it's with the best intentions, but with little knowledge of extended, relentless, overwhelming physical pain of the kind that she would live with. The lonely rooms he has at this time in his life inhabited, in which remembered nature has indeed lifted the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world, are not equivalent to the confinement of the sick room that Dorothy experiences in her maturity. None of that, of course, is William's fault. It's a young man's poem, it's full of wishfulness. What Dorothy learned through her years of illness is that no matter how much you might love nature, it can't heal you. What you can hope for is ongoing companionship. Her sickbed consolations are grappling with this central question: how to find consolation when the things you used to rely on are no longer available to you in the same way, when you can't tread the hills or feel moonlight or misty mountain winds. So Thoughts on My Sickbed begins with this "and," which I think is really fascinating as well, as though mid-thought, mid-argument, and has a remnant of my life been pilfered into sunny spring. She's shut indoors, unable to enjoy it. The same language of imprisonment and release appears in her lines for Dora H., written in June 1835, in the early stages of recovery from her third great crisis. In that poem, she explains, "My failing strength, my tottering limbs, into a prison change this room." These lines in particular are repeated and repeated in fragmentary drafts in her journal at that time. In this poem too, she attempts to turn the prison of the sick room in verse into a sanctuary. She writes, "Though it is not a cheerless spot, a cell of sorrow or of gloom, no damp cold walls enclose it round, no heavy hinges grating sound disturb the silence and the calm." She knows her room isn't literally a prison, though at times it might feel like it. But she wavers between these two realities. The room is a prison, is not a prison. She is free in her mind, able to exit her room through the portal of her body-mind, or she is trapped in her mind, in her body. In the drafts of Thoughts on My Sickbed, Dorothy moves between describing herself as a prisoner in this quiet room, to a prisoner in this lonely room, to imprisoned in this lonely room, ending up with no prisoner in this lonely room. This too is echoed in the writing of contemporary disabled artists such as Letty McHugh, who writes about the illness place you go to when you need to send your mind as far away from your body as you can, what she calls the farthest edge of the universe that is always expanding, part of a multiverse entered through the sick body. In Lines for Dora H., it's the window that turns the prison into a sanctuary. The open window in Dorothy's room allows free entrance of the summer breeze into the room and lets her look out onto the leafy trees, the sky, the clouds, the gleaming showers, crags, lakes, and odoriferous flowers. She may not be able to reach them, but they're there in some way with her, just as her friends and loved ones are in faithful recollections. But the great power in Thoughts on My Sickbed seems to be waning. She does need the breeze, she does need to see the landscape. She still feels nature's gifts, but she needs to experience them with her bodily self, not just in thought. She needs external stimulation. The mansions of the mind and the dwelling place of memory are not enough alone. She's trying so hard in these poems to find something good in her situation, to not feel sorry for herself. She's trying to find the moral in the riddle of her own life. In drafts of Thoughts on My Sickbed, she writes, feelings kept down and repressed by exuberant health and thought, of blessings strengthened as the body decays. She explores the idea that illness has released something in her, pushed something aside by her busy restlessness in years gone by. This disappears from the neat copy, but lingers in the idea that the bliss she feels when the flowers are brought to her is greater than anything that she's ever felt before. This echoes an idea in her earlier poem, Irregular Verses, written in 1827, the saddest heart feels deepest gladness. She wants to find not only consolations, but gifts in her sick room. So her solution was threefold. She brings nature into her sick room and makes it into a kind of garden. And she also travels beyond it in mind, memory, and poetry. To write these consolations of indoor nature and internal travel into a poem that could be repeated and repeated like a spell or prayer that allowed consolation to be recreated by the words when it could not be found in the room or the body. A century later, Beatrix Potter would do similarly in her old age. I'll put this in just for Penny. That's a lie, I just love this quote. Writing, "Thank God I have the seeing eye. That is to say, as I lie in bed, I can walk step by step on the fells and rough lands, seeing every stone and flower and patch of bog and cotton pass where my old legs will never take me again." I love this idea, the seeing eye that allows you to travel. The kind of companionship Dorothy is seeking does not rely on physical presence in the present moment. It transcends the physical, the temporal, but also puts special status on co-presence. After an acute health crisis of January and February 1833, the family began to fill her room with pot plants. William described it to Edward Cullinan as that they now have in the room a beautiful bunch of primroses, which is full of promise for her, transplanted from our green terrace. So they're literally lifting the garden up and taking it to her room. Her pots and branches will come to have powerful significance to her, the beauties of my room, as she calls them. The trees and flowers become her dear friends, like the forlorn, almost horizontal branch she describes in June 1834, which she says, "When I lie on my bed, I would not part with for £20. Her indoor garden allows her to feel connected with the wider world. She's made her room into a place of togetherness. Her room becomes a kind of miniature garden with its own non-human inhabitants, as we see in this quote here from her journal. There's butterflies, birds, and bees who visit her sick room gardens. From within her room, she hears rooks and owls in the trees. In December 1834, Mary records how unusually fine weather that Christmas has allowed Dorothy to keep her windows open, and those windows have allowed free entrance to a pet robin that is almost a constant companion to her. Its nightly perch is often upon a nail which hangs from one of the pictures, with which the walls of her room are now almost covered, and its soft warbling is most delicious and soothing to her feelings. So that's Mary in December 1834. In the notes on the poems he dictates to Isabella Fenwick, William describes Dorothy's robin as choosing to take up its abode with her. In his description, the robin becomes both entertainer and therapist. It used to sing and fan her face with its wings in a manner that was very touching, he writes. Although this pet robin is a new friend that particular winter, robins have been singing to her in her sick room throughout her illness. In November 1830, there are warbling robins at her window, despite the rain, and she's heard them all through winter. So Dorothy here appears like an aging Cinderella with songbirds for company in her solitary room, and her sickbed becomes a kind of bird hide that enables her to listen in a way that she never could have done before, and enable her to hear that that song is continual. It goes on through all of the dark parts of the year. I find this really instructive as a way to maintain a relationship with nature which doesn't rely on us being out in it. As many of you will know, I live with chronic incurable conditions that affect every part of my body and cause continual pain, limit my energy, and are aggravated by exertion. As I write in the introduction to the Company of Owls, I cannot wait on moving in the cold or dark for hours in the hope of a sighting, or carrying myself to places on foot far from home or the road, or safe paths to seek them out. In the past, this has made me feel like nature writing wasn't for me, or other people like me, which was something I wanted to change for other people. What looking back at disability history shows us is that we've always been here, always finding creative routes to access, always making our own gardens, whether indoors or out, inaccessible pathways or sick room beauties. Dorothy happens to offer a brilliant example of this, but she's just one of many. When we recover disability history, we also recover possibilities for the present and the future, and that too is a kind of companionship. So we're going to move to the second part of the talk now, which is mimic hootings. If you're familiar with the Company of Owls, you'll already be familiar with these three, who become the centre of the book. And they became the centre of the book by presenting themselves very helpfully on the day that I signed the contract. So they weren't going to be the main characters, but they became the main characters. So with this ideal of companionship in mind, I'm going to read a little bit of the Company of Owls that I don't often get to share, because it's really just a short Wordsworthian history of owls, and forms the chapter called A Short History of Owls in Grasmere in the book. So there's a long history of tawny owls here, and I think of our owls as being an illustrious lineage, hooting to writers for hundreds of years, documented and undocumented. In her studies of birds in Rydal through the 1890s, Mary Louisa Louis Armitt lists the tawny owl as a permanent resident, abundant. She calls it a wood owl, as many did then, a term now used for the much broader genus, within which the tawny owl is one of tens of species who dwell in forests and woodland around the globe. To mark the opening of the youth hostel at Thorney Howe in 1932, Grasmere-based writer and academic E.M. Ward wrote a history of the site for the Yorkshire Post, hoping guests would enjoy the company of the brown wood owls who hoot from the old fern-grown chimney of the barn. The owls of Grasmere appear too as secondary characters in Ward's 1941 novel Forest Silver, which centres on tensions over land use and housing between locals and what she calls off-comes, seeking shelter in Grasmere during the Blitz. In Forest Silver, chronically ill veteran Richard Blunt, newly arrived in the village, manages to find a room in the Prince of Wales Hotel, only because its previous occupant could not bear the noise of the owls at night. The waitress in the hotel explains to Richard, he comes from Liverpool and he says he can't stand another night of them owls, said he'd rather have a blitz every time. So Richard's stay in Grasmere, and then the whole plot of the novel, is enabled by the sleep-disturbing owls haunting the hotel, separating those who can assimilate into place from those who can't. The hotel, now known as the Daffodil, is directly across the road from my home and from Dove Cottage, where over 100 years earlier, the Wordsworth siblings likewise wrote about their encounters with tawny owls. On 17th of March 1802, Dorothy Wordsworth records in her journal that she and William hear owls as they sit by the old road at the foot of White Moss, just down the road from where our owls nest and hunt today. She's walked to ride off a post, and William has come out to meet her part way and walk back with her. Instead, they sit for a while, enjoying the sounds and sights of twilight. The owls hooted when we sat on the wall at the foot of White Moss. The sky broke more and more, and we saw the moon now and then. On 13th June that year, she and William walk in the evening on the same path we take onto the common until they reach a point where they can see down over Rydal Water. Dorothy records, "The stars were out by ones and twos with no cuckoo, no little birds. The air was not warm." As they walk back, they hear owls calling from Bainrig Wood on the other side of the road. There was an owl hooting in Bainriggs. Its first halloo was so like a human shout that I was surprised when it made its second call, tremulous and lengthened out, to find that the shout had come from an owl. And we've had exactly that same experience of thinking, what is that? Is it a human? Is it an owl? Is it something else? On 19th of June, she's writing later in the night and hears the owls hooting outside the cottage just before the early midsummer dawn. The shutters were closed, but I heard the birds singing. There was our own thrush shouting with an impatient shout, so it sounded to me. The morning was still, the twittering of the little birds was very gloomy. The owl had hooted a quarter of an hour before. Now the cocks were crowing. It was near daylight. I put out my candle and went to bed. It's probably not surprising that we have heard owls in these same places. In some ways, it's a much more apt habitat to hear for tawny owls now than it was then. Grasmere and Rydal were substantially less forested in 1800 than they are now. The island on the lake, now dense with tall trees, was a self-contained meadow in 1800. The upper parts of White Moss Common, where this little row of owlets is, had barely a single tree growing on them. Even photographs from the 1880s and 1890s show a landscape so starkly treeless it's hard to reconcile it as the same one we now know post-enclosure. The Wordsworths would struggle to find the same views now that they admired in 1802, but they might find the descendants of the owls to whom they listened. So owls appear through William's poetry with shifting meanings. Living in Hawkshead through his school days, he must have been familiar with the callings of owls as a soundtrack to his own night adventures, as recounted in the Prelude, long before he settled in Grasmere. Whilst he was at school, he wrote a poem called An Evening Walk, which includes the sportive cry of the mocking owl as part of the acoustic landscape. He was someone who liked to walk at night all through his life, and owls must have continued to feature wherever he was. Perhaps because of these real-world encounters, when owls appear in his poems, they're far more than merely symbolic or decorative. In The Excursion, owls appear as a marker of solitude, rifted barns where no one dwells with a wide-staring owl. Similarly, his late sonnet Seclusion imagines a hooting owl as night watch to an ideal hermitage, scooped out of living rock. Owls, along with foxes, lizards, gilded newts, and wrens, repopulate the ruins of monasteries in his sonnet on their dissolution. So owls just kind of pop up all the way through his poetry as part of the background. In The Wagoner, the screech owl, identified by its halloo call as a tawny, not a barn owl, has different meanings for different people. The sailor interprets the owl as a harbinger of doom, worse than any funeral bell, forewarning, "We shall be meeting ghosts tonight." But Benjamin the Wagoner has a different understanding, recognising the owl as one of many who tease the Windermere ferryman by mimicking the sound of travellers calling for a boat. "It's a jolly bird," he says, "making merry with its hallooing, and nothing to be afraid of." At the end of the poem, the speaker calls Benjamin a living almanac, a speaking diary. He was someone who knew the land and all of its inhabitants, feathered and otherwise, as friends. But maybe the sailor is also partly right. From that night on, Benjamin does become a thing of the past, a kind of ghost, and maybe the owl was foretelling that loss. The most well-known of William's poetic owls appears in There Was a Boy, included in 1800 in the second edition of the Lyrical Ballads as a poem in its own right, and later incorporated into the Prelude as one of his spots of time, those moments of particular resonance with a renovating power to our minds even in memory. So this is There Was a Boy. So composed November or December 1798, first published 1800. There was a boy, ye knew him well, ye cliffs and islands of Winander, many a time, at evening, when the earliest stars began to move along the edges of the hills, rising or setting, would he stand alone beneath the trees or by the glimmering lake, and there, with fingers interwoven, both hands pressed closely palm to palm, and to his mouth uplifted, he, as though an instrument, blew mimic hootings to the silent owls, that they might answer him. And they would shout across the watery vale, and shout again, responsive to his call, with quivering peals and long halloos, and screams and echoes loud, redoubled and redoubled, concourse wild of jocund din. And when there came a pause of silence such as baffled his best skill, then, sometimes in that silence, while he hung listening, a gentle shock of mild surprise is carried far into his heart, the voice of mountain torrents, or the visible scene would enter unawares into his mind with all its solemn imagery, its rocks, its woods, and that uncertain heaven received into the bosom of the steady lake. The boy was taken from his mates and died in childhood, ere he was full 12 years old. Preeminent in beauty is the vale where he was born and bred. The churchyard hangs upon a slope of a village school, and through that churchyard, when my way has led on summer evenings, I believe that there a long half-hour together I have stood, mute, looking at the grave in which he lies. So the poem describes how a boy would stand alone beneath the trees or by the glimmering lake and mimic owl calls to spur the silent owls he knew were in the woods into voice. One of the things I've kept thinking about since I wrote this book is that this suggests a huge colony of owls there, doesn't it? And which I think historical records suggest as well, actually, that tawny owls lived in much larger colonies when there were more of them than they do now. So these owls get lost in the calls get lost in the back and forth between the calls he made and the wild concourse of the owls themselves, responsive to his call with quivering peals and long halloos and screams and echoes loud. Their voices are joyful and playful, jocund and mirthful, just like the owls in the Wagoner. There's nothing sinister about these owls in the actual calling part of the poem. There's many voices. They're an orchestra within a vast company of living, speaking things beyond the human. The boy is the only one alone, a sole human choosing to spend his time not with his own kind, but with theirs. When the owls are silent, he listens with a depth of attention that carries the voices of all the wild things into his mind, not just the owls, but the mountain torrents, the woods, the rocks, all of them. So the earliest version of this poem, written in 1798, ends there, with the owls in the wood, and it's in first person, I. It is a young poet who interweaves his fingers and blows through them by the shore of Windermere to speak to the owls. The poem is published in Lyrical Ballads, has this additional second part in which the speaker tells us that the boy died before he was 12, and the owls are made to foretell death after all. In the prelude, it keeps these changes, but it's blended into a larger reminiscence of childhood. Some accounts suggest the boy is based on a school friend of William's from Hawkshead, William Raincock, who was known to be able to replicate the hoots of a tawny owl. William Raincock did not die in childhood any more than William Wordsworth did. Other accounts suggest the boy is John Vickers, who did die when William was 12. We can't know if there was a boy, other than William, who called to owls and died, or if the poem is a blend of memories of autobiography and biography blurred together by time and symbolism. Either way, it feels like, to me, it really does feel like a kind of ars poetica, a medication, that was good slip. Maybe a meditation on the role of the poet in relation to the world around them. If they call out with enough skill, they might hope for original response from the listening world, to use a term Robert Frost employs in his poem, The Most of It. So I always think of these poems together, and I'll read the most of it to you as well. So this is Robert Frost, a little bit later. He thought he kept the universe alone, for all the voice in answer he could wake was but the mocking echo of his own from some tree-hidden cliff across the lake. Some morning from the boulder-broken beach he would cry out on life, that what it wants is not its own love back in copy speech, but counter-love, original response. And nothing ever came of what he cried unless it was the embodiment that crashed in the cliff's talus on the other side, and then in the far distant water splashed. But after a time allowed for it to swim, instead of proving human when it neared and someone else additional to him, as a great buck it powerfully appeared, pushing the crumpled water up ahead, and landed pouring like a waterfall, and stumbled through the rocks with horny tread, and forced the underbrush, and that was all. The most of it, like There Was a Boy, begins with a lone male in a mountainous landscape, but all that his cries produce is his own voice parroted back from the trees and rocks across a lake. So he doesn't have this kind of transcendental moment of hearing the living torrents, like Little William or the speaker of the poem does. Then at last a startled deer, a buck who parts the landscape before him as he goes, appears. Frost's poem seems in part a rejection of the Wordsworthian ideal, that a poet might listen well enough and speak truly enough that the landscape and everything living in it and with it becomes part of them, and vice versa. In Frost's poem, the man is merely a disturbance, much as the owls might have thought of the boy of Winander, whoever he really was. Two of William's late poems show his desire to address the popular perception of owls. In A Morning Excursion, he criticises the human insistence on hearing foreboding in the tawny owl's call, missing in doing so evidence of joy. In 1834, he dedicates a whole poem to correcting these misconceptions. In An Evening Voluntary that travels from the lakeside at Grasmere to ancient Athens and on to Mount Olympus in an effort to rehabilitate the owl. The poem opens on an oak-crowned hill by the shore of Grasmere. In a note on the poem dictated to Isabella Fenwick, he explains it was composed at the side of Grasmere Lake. The mountains that enclose the vale are most favourable to the reverberation of sound. So this was written in 1834 and published the following year. The leaves that rustled on this oak-crowned hill and sky that danced among those leaves are still. Rest smooths away for sleep. In field and bower, soft shades and dews have shed their blended power on drooping eyelid and the closing flower. Sound is there none at which the faintest heart might leap, the weakest nerve of superstition start, save when the owlet's unexpected scream pierces the ethereal vault, and, mid the gleam of unsubstantial imagery, the dream from the hushed vale's realities transferred to the still lake. The imaginative bird seems mid-inverted mountains, not unheard. Grave creature, whether while the moon shines bright on their wings open wide for smoothest flight, thou art discovered in a roofless tower, rising from what may once have been a lady's bower, or spied where thou sitt'st moping in thy mew at the dim centre of a churchyard yew, or from a rifted crag or ivy tod deep in a wood, thy secure abode, thou givest for pastime's sake, by shriek or shout, a puzzling notice of thy whereabout. May the night never come, nor day be seen, when I shall scorn thy voice or mock thy mien. In classic ages, men perceived a soul of sapience in thy aspect, headless owl. He, Athens, reverenced in the studious grove, and near the golden sceptre grasped by Jove, his eagle's favoured perch, while round him sate the gods revolving the decrees of fate, thou too wert present at Minerva's side. Hark to that second larum. Far and wide the elements have heard, and rock and cave replied. Like There Was a Boy, this is a poem about sound and echoes and reflections, of ideas as well as things. The owlet's unexpected scream pierces the hushed vale's realities, and from out of the reflected lake, from under the inverted mountains held in the mirror of the still water, the owl's sinister double is heard instead, a Gothic symbol, not a real bird. The close of this evening voluntary calls back fittingly to There Was a Boy, calling us as readers to listen to the owl's voice. We should be more like the elements, which have heard it already, and the rock and cave which reply, calling back as once the boy on the shore of another lake did. Instead of feeding the weakest nervous superstition that views the owl as ominous, we should recognise its sapience, its wisdom, insight, discernment. We should, like the owl, be well acquainted with the true value of things. So, if we're reading these owl poems as Ars Poeticas, at least in part, from young William we have this idea of writing as mimic hootings, practice in echoing nature, of trying to capture the voice of nature from this attentive immersion in it. From older William we have this recognition not only of the owl's wisdom, but its command of audience. The elements have heard, and rock and cave replied. Now I want to bring us back to Dorothy, because in the same year that William writes his Leaving Voluntary, Dorothy writes in her journal of not hearing owls. Again, provokingly fine weather for our 3 poor prisoners, herself, Jane Elwood, and her niece Dora, cannot stir out beyond the garden. Well, it is blessing enough for me to look on it. The rooks today joyously busy. Owls have been almost silent for 2 or 3 nights. Almost silent, not entirely. Dorothy's mostly housebound at this time, as she says, unable to go out even into the garden. She tells herself it's enough to look on it, but listening is also an act of companionship. That the silence of the owls is notable makes them an unwritten soundtrack to other nights of illness at this time, company in her ill nights as they have been in mine. This idea of companionship, a companionship which doesn't depend on you going out to seek it, as she did in her youth, is deeply instructive for thinking about access to nature. She offers us an accessible nature and a model for accessible nature writing, one that does not rely on being able to stride out into the world. I would also argue that this model of companionship acknowledges the agency and particularity of our non-human neighbours and co-tenants, as well as our own bodily limits. It's this model of companionship that I sought to write into with the Company of Owls, and that I've tried to call back to. In doing so, I hope in turn to model how we might learn from disability history about benefiting from connection with the natural world without exploiting it. In The Serviceberry, Robin Wall Kimmerer highlights the importance of mutual responsibility in our approach to the non-human, urging us to recognise our membership in the web of reciprocity. We must relearn how to be good companions of nature, not patients, not worshippers. We must relearn kinship with nature. We must think about what nature needs, as we would with any friend or loved one. What can we do to bring nature joy or solace or peace? What can we do to make its material circumstances better? Can we improve habitats for our non-human neighbours? We can all be more thoughtful about our consumption, taking only what we need. We can work with others to make this part of everyday life in our home places, and to be aware of our impact. I'm trying to learn from both writers and owls how to be a better companion to nature, a better co-tenant of our shared habitat, to learn to seek no more from nature but its society, to know myself part of the world and the world part of me. I want to offer it the same care and respect I would offer to any human loved one. I offer it the same care and respect I try to extend to myself. This is companionship. So those are our little owlets, and I'm going to leave you with those 3. Thank you.
That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm not sure, we can actually top the photograph
Do you
behind.
need to see the little owl video?
They are indescribably lovely. Oh my goodness.
It's like looking at me and then going, no.
No. That was really wonderful and very, very inspiring. And I will just say, in relation to the that beautiful passage you read out by Beatrice Potter. So in the chapter where I talk about that, I do compare it to the sick bed poem because they just seem to speak to each other.
Exactly, they really do. They really do. When I found that quote, I was like, this is it.
Exactly.
It.
I was literally trying to find the first time that poem was published to see if you might have encountered it.
Yeah.
And it was possible, actually. There was a section.
Yes.
So, We digress. So, I'll have a private chat with Polly over here. So we are going to have a little bit of a window for Q&A. Probably got sort of 10, 12 minutes for that. And then it is very exciting that we have an extra dimension to this, in that if you haven't already got your copy of this beautiful book, as Polly mentioned, the paperback edition is just out. As you can see, I've colour coordinated beautifully for this evening spent. And we've got some copies for sale, and Polly would be very happy to sign a copy if you'd like to do that. So we'll make time for that too. But I think we've probably still got 10, 12 minutes for questions. So, does anyone in the audience have anything they would like to ask Polly?
Hi Polly, thank you Penny. That was amazing. Thank you. It's a genuine question, and I haven't read the book yet, so you feel free to say it have you found any other instances of later poets who have also included owls in their poetic outpourings?
Yeah, I mean, there's billions of poems about owls, full stop, and there's so much writing about owls at all, actually, that I panicked a bit when I was writing this book. I don't know whether I told you about this one, I think. So if we just go back for a second to this moment. Oh, those guys. Hi guys! One of the reasons this was so exciting was not just because I'd never seen 3 tawny owlets in a row in this box before. I'd seen the odd one, I'd never seen all. It's just amazing to have a year where 3 survived anyway, but also to catch this one moment where all 3 of them were sitting there just about to leave the box. But it also really helped with the book, because I'd signed up to write this book about owls because I'd been following these tawny owls around, and I'd been writing about them, and I've been writing poems about them. And in the book there were some owls which I'd had been quite a large part of my life in the years before these 3 appeared as well, who are quite important in the book. I thought the book was mostly going to be about them. But I'd started to panic slowly already when I realised that there's a lot of books about owls by people who are very serious bird people. And I was just going to go, oh look, it's a fluffy potato, which is what I do, literally quoting the book. Or it looks like a squishmallow, which is also one of my very scientifically accurate descriptions of a tawny owlet. And as I think, well, what do I have to say that's different to these other people? And then I realised that actually there's very few books about tawny owls in the wild. And one of the things I found out and then do include in the book is that there's a kind of very peculiar perception that we can't know very much about tawny owls because they live in the woods somehow, and they're very secretive, and so we just don't know about them, even though they're the most common owl in the UK. And if you know where they are, if they live near you, like these guys, you probably actually know quite a lot about them. There's also a lot of people who have kept rehabilitated tawny owls as well, so there's quite a lot about them that way. But there's lots of poems, and they appear in lots of different people's poems. There's a few other poems that I quote in the book that I particularly like about owls, but there's lots. Often the owls are more symbolic than they are actual. So going back to the evening voluntary problem, the way that people use owls to represent things, often they end up representing more than being. And I'm very interested in writing about animals and how we write about animals to allow them to do both of those things at once. Because I think we can't escape metaphor. We think metaphorically in some ways. I know I certainly do. So when I see an owl, I think certain things. Although maybe I don't think doomy things because I love them. But I do, a whole load of literary owls and symbolic owls and metaphorical owls and dream owls pop up, mythological owls pop up in my mind every time I see an owl as well. And we all do that. But I'm interested in writing about animals that also allows them to be animals as well. And I think a lot of poetry about owls mostly just allows them to be symbols. Not always true, but yeah. But yeah, I think there's an amazing anthology to be made of all the owl poems.
Next task. I think there was another question just along. Was it? Did you have a question? No. Yes.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what you were saying about the sounds, because we often think about the landscape as a visual thing,
Yeah.
but actually, if you're stuck in a room,
Yes.
all you've got is the sound.
Yeah.
And when Dorothy talks about the cheerful bittern, wouldn't it be great to hear a bittern on
Yes.
Idlewater? I just wondered what you think about that, because it is obviously Wordsworth that's writing about it, and people are writing about the sounds, but there isn't a kind of criticism of the soundscape of the landscape.
Yeah.
And just to add, we had a scout builder one time who was on our roof, and he came down and he said, "I hate it here, it's so quiet, I want to hear some sirens."
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think soundscapes are really important, and it's something I think about a lot, and I try to kind of bring into my own writing as well. And I think in a Wordsworthian sense, they're really important, like both to Dorothy and William. I mean, one of the things I think about all the time with William and his model of poetry that he learned from Dorothy, of course, is about this listening to what's around you, which to him was also listening to the ghostly language of the ancient earth, as well as listening to the living beings that are in it. But that also means listening to living stone, living rock, the living universe. All the things that we often don't think of as having sapience, I suppose, or sentience, as well as things that do. And then that makes all that soundscape part of it too. And I think even now, like, you know, you sit and you listen. If you actually stop and listen, you hear a lot that I think in our daily lives we don't often kind of stop and pay attention to. I haven't heard a bittern in Grasmere, but I have heard a lot of things that supposedly aren't meant to be there anymore. If you just sit and listen, sometimes with the help of a listening device as well. But there are all sorts of things to hear that we need to pay attention to, I think.
I've got a quick related question for you, but just as a hint to that, because I was thinking about when you were reading it. So the line from the Boy of Rhinanda passage, where he talks about, I scribbled it down so he wasn't remember, echoes loud, ridgeables, concourse wild. So in her letter, open letter to Country Life, where she's complaining about the hydroplane on Windermere, which was making this terrible racket, Potter quotes that line, because the whole point is the silence of then they echo around the Vale, the hootings, and this terrible noise of the hydroplane is, and so she quotes it, echoes loud, redoubled, concourse wild for the plane, but obviously leaves out joke and din, because there's nothing very positive about it at all, but she subverts the idea and takes the Wordsworthian idea to hear the sounds of, not the sirens, but you know, the sounds of modernity. But yeah, my question actually was going to go back to what you were saying about one of the sources you looked at, the Armate work on birds, and because I know you studied that quite closely, you were doing quite a lot of listening, especially during the pandemic. Did you sort of come to any conclusions from that in terms of kind of bird life changes? I mean, both positive and negative, maybe?
So Louis Armand she was an amazing naturalist, if you're not familiar with her, and she wrote a document of the birds of Rydal, which recorded all of the birds. I can't remember the year, I think it was 1899, but I might be making that up slightly. Recorded all of the birds that she saw and all the birds that she heard, so this extraordinary record of what's there. And you do see changes, so some of the things that were rare for her have become more common for us, and vice versa in some ways as well. So there is some kind of shift around, but there are some things that weren't frequent for her, which we have many more of now as well.
So it's not all doom and
No, not at all. It's kind of shifting patterns in that way. Yeah, it was really interesting. But I think, you know, you see that looking at these historical records. One of the things that's amazing about having all of Dorothy's weather journals as well is that you see actually really similar weather. And you know, she'll relate when the first cuckoo sang and things like that. And often it's been the same time. You know, the last couple of years, maybe a day or two out from 1830. So some things have changed and changed a lot. Extreme weather events affect more locally than bigger shifts do, I think, in terms of some of that timing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
a fascinating resource, isn't it, to read from that side.
It really is.
Okay, maybe one more question, potentially?
I feel like there was someone down.
Yes,
Go on.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. I'm struck by the juxtaposition between the robin and the owl. And this is just like a really open-ended invitation to like think more about like the difference, I don't know, in companionship with these two
Yeah.
different kinds of birds. I love your thoughts.
It's really interesting, and there's a bit that I didn't read today for time, but where she gets very worried with that particular Christmas robin that they've been given a cat, and she's convinced that the cat is going to kill the robin and it's all going to end horribly, and she weeps about it for days. But it doesn't happen. It's okay. They keep the cat and the robin separate. It's all fine. So there is that kind of predator-prey relationship, which I think is really interesting. But we also, we have this very strange relationship with robins, I think, in the UK, where we think of them as very kind of, oh, they're so lovely, robins are so cute. They're actually really mean to other birds. But they are, they like humans more than they like other birds. So
Yeah.
it's not that surprising in a way that robins, I think, partly have that status for people because they like to accompany people. So if you're digging in the garden, or a robin will sit with you. People attach a lot of different meaning to robins as kind of messengers to the beyond and things like that. So often have very kind of personal attachments to them as well. And you do get personal attachments. We had a fledgling robin who used to come in our house before we lived with a cat when we lived at the other end of Grasmere. One year, it just kept coming in. Like its parents had come into the house quite a lot. So every time we were sitting outside, it would come and beg food. And then when it had its children, the children started doing it too. And one of them literally followed me around for months until I went away for a couple of weeks, and it clearly gave up on me and gave up. But if I didn't come outside and give it some food, it would come inside to get the food. And our house was like a proper cave at that point. So it was coming a long way inside. And we have robins now that come in and I told you this, to come in and eat our cat's food. And they started doing it some years ago, and I got really worried about it in a Dorothy kind of way. I was like, oh no, this is going to end badly for the robins. Especially with our old cat Nala, who was known as the floofy assassin. That she would sit outside Dove Cottage and eviscerate voles in front of tourists, which wasn't. She took her role as a business services cat very, very seriously. So we were really worried when we noticed that when we had the back door open, the robins started to come in and they'd take kibble from her bowl and they'd fly out again. They did it once, we thought, oh, okay. They did it again. So every time we have the back door open, they'll just be coming in and out constantly, just continually stealing kibble from the bowl. We can't stop them. They carried on. The cat just looked at them and went, who's allowing this to happen? and it just kind of carried on. Nala very sadly died last November, but before she died, she allowed another cat to move in with us, Mickle, who has taken up the mantle of watching the robins eat the pig and going, why is this happening? And then not doing anything about it. And this year, because he hadn't dealt with it before, in spring when we first kind of opened the door for the first time, and had the door open all day, and so the robins were coming in. I thought, oh, this could end badly. I'll shut the door and shut the robins out. Opened the front door to let someone in with a package, and ended up with a robin stuck in the house because it had come in the front door for the kibble. So I just had to give up at that point and go, okay, the robins think they live in the house too. I guess the robins live in the house.
We're all going to have to be good companions together around it.
Yeah, I know. So the robins, I think, have a very strange relationship with humans and human dwelling in a way that I think we don't kind of quite look at straight on sometimes. And very different to maybe other songbirds. I think it's not surprising that it's robins that move into Dorothy's room in that way. Because they're going, this is mine, I'm having everything in here, the rest of you, get out. That's what they're saying to all the other birds. So in a way, the kind of predator-prey relationship that you might think, you know, if it was a blue tit, if we were thinking about Cinderella in a more literal sense, it might be slightly different, I think. She doesn't have owls coming in though.
No, I think we do need counter volume though, because of the Robin.
Yeah. Just angry Robin.
Yeah. It's really cute, fluffy owls, like really aggressive.
Yeah,
Robin.
really aggressive robins. Yeah, I think the owls are just a lot softer, really, than the robins. I don't know if the owls, because I mean the other thing that happens obviously with tawny owls is songbirds will mob them to try and get them to move. So when they are kind of, and we've seen it happen a lot, that when they are sitting around in the daytime in a tree, often the first time we know a tawny owl is there because the blackbird will start alarming. And the closer you get, that's the blackbird alarm. So if you follow the blackbird alarm, you get to see it. But quite often all the songbirds will get together and try and move the tawny owl. I don't know if I've seen a robin participating in that because the robins hate other birds so much. They're not good players, team players now. Yeah. That didn't totally answer your question. But
It was a very interesting answer.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll probably pause there just before we do a proper thank you to Polly, which we'll do in a second. So if I hang fire, I'll do my usual bit of housekeeping at this point, and just mention the next event in our series. So this is what we will be doing on the 4th of November, for anyone who can make it. So we've got Dr. Sue Allen, cultural historian, coming along, and I thought it would be nice to get some music into the series. So she's coming on to focus on music and dance in the Lake Counties, and there will definitely be some music as part of that. So Sue will be performing some music as well, which will be really lovely.